we're looking at demystifying the workplace. We know that we are in a period of transition at the moment, that things are changing really fast and it's incredibly difficult to keep up. We have been looking particularly over the last year at the question that most of you have on your mind. Will AI take my job? It's a reasonable question to ask. It's one we felt was probably no, but there are some conditions on that. There are some terms. And we decided, well, we really should look at some more research on this to understand what the situation is. Why do we feel so under pressure? And what is the reality of the situation around us? There are so many things happening at the moment. The short answer is actually, no, not yet. We don't believe AI has taken your job for many people, not for everybody, but for most of us. But it is time to start moving forwards. It is time to stop looking behind us at what used to work and start looking forwards at what is going to be successful for us, particularly in the job application process in the future. The last 10 years have been scary, quite honestly. Much of the research on this coming from very reputable organizations like the Oxford Online Institute and many others have been looking at what we call exposure data. And they've been making some really quite terrifying predictions based on exposure data. Exposure is the idea that you look at the capabilities of the machine and you look at the roles that people perform in occupations. We have lots of taxonomies of roles, particularly jobs in the US, so we can see exactly which skills people are using to perform each of these occupations. And they then see where there's a match. This role, this task under this job matches the skill that an AI can do, probably of similar quality, but usually of significantly faster completion time. And so they look at this data and they say, oh, look what the AI can do, look what it could do, according to this taxonomy of skills for each occupation. And then they estimate how many jobs will be impacted. And this is important work, and this is not to criticize the work from 10 years ago. We need to plan and prepare for the future. We need our governments to plan, especially to support us. But it did result in some very terrifying figures. 8 million jobs in the UK at risk from AI. 1 million jobs in London are going to be changed next year. AI, I love this one. It won't work. AI will not wipe out half of jobs after all, say academics. You frightened us, you terrified us with that prediction. And they did say half our jobs would go. And they turned out to be wrong. The problem with looking at exposure data, which is what has dominated this conversation for the last 10 years, is that it is very technically deterministic. And what I mean by that is it's this assumption that because a technology exists, everybody's going to adopt it immediately, no questions. And we know that that's just not true. We know that's not the way it works, that people are resistant. We know that once these technologies that are in laboratories and working fine are released into a far more complex system where there are multiple interactions and circumstances that appear and disappear daily, that actually AI does not cope as well in those kinds of circumstances. People are very right to be concerned about it. I was looking earlier on this week at the taxonomies of risks, AI risks, and MIT list 1,700 AI risks. That's not individual incidents, that's different ways that the AI can go wrong. And it's quite right, I think, that companies are looking at that list, that 1,700 list, and saying, we don't want to get mixed up in that. And so exposure data is a small part of the picture, and a lot of the scare stories come from that. What else can we look at? What else can we point to and say, well, where are our jobs going? I think we have to say for sure that the hiring market is in transition. What's causing that transition is very difficult to say. We have unfortunately seen a drop in large graduate employers in the UK. So where you may have easily gone onto a graduate training program after your degree, um, those jobs are down about 8 to 10% across the board among large graduate employers. Now, then, most of us do not, even in a good year, go straight into a graduate training program. In fact, it's a very rare experience for the vast majority of people. I think only something like 10% of graduates will actually secure a place in a formal graduate training scheme. The majority of us go away and work in a cafe for a little bit, get a job, our skills and talents are discovered, and we get promoted very quickly. Um, or maybe we do get a job that uses our skills. It's not in a that does not use our skills. It's in a cafe. We start working part-time, fixing problems and using the skills that we have. And again, that's how we start to build up our career. And if you are at the moment looking at the job market, I can assure you this is also the pattern for our fellows, our most successful senior members. I would say quite a large number of them, probably about 40–50% of them, go into a job that is not a traditional graduate job on graduation, and their talent and skills get recognized. Get yourself in there. You will start to rise to the top if you do all the right things. So we do have a situation where, in general, across the board, graduate employment is down. We have to ask, is that because of AI or is that because of something else, which we'll come back to in a moment. Competition for jobs, we know, is fierce. And I think this makes it feel as though the situation is more challenging than it actually is, simply because AI has impacted on the application process so much since 2022. I picked out 2022 because that is when ChatGPT launched at the end of that year. So 2022 was the ChatGPT free year, the last one we experienced. And on average, there were 86 applicants per vacancy, which is still quite high. But by 2024, it almost doubled to 140 applicants per vacancy. That is a lot of people you've got to beat to get that one position. And in some specific sectors, like the fast-moving consumer goods sector, it's actually nearer to 300 applicants per vacancy. This is because ChatGPT just makes it so much easier to create spam applications, to just generate a tailored CV and a tailored covering letter that is identical to all 139 other applications that are going for the same job. When we speak to hirers, they despair of receiving hundreds of identical job applications. But that's the way it's working at the moment. And this is all giving us the feeling that it's just got so much harder, quite honestly, to be able to stand out in the crowd. So that is definitely one negative impact of AI on the hiring process. The good news is, if you work in our field, actually, our field is bucking the trend. So when I said, let's go back, when I said overall graduate recruitment is down 8 to 10%, this is things like the social sciences, the arts, the humanities, business school degrees, those kinds of things. If you're working in AI and data, we've had a great time actually, and it's continuing to rise. It's look at this figure. It's almost 3 times year on year higher, which is really great news for us. This is in the UK, but figures are similar in other nations as well. So not to worry if you are one of our data analytics or business analytics student members. It's looking good. And if you're not, then look at the numbers. You could start to work in an AI adjacent role, like doing a little bit of human resource management analytics, or a little bit of marketing analytics. These are adjacent roles where you don't need hardcore technical AI skills, but you do need a little bit of data training. If you are from a completely different field and you've joined us because you're generally curious and interested to know where this is all going. You can judge your own risk exposure. Now then, many of our computer scientists are very concerned about their risk exposure because companies like Google and Microsoft develop these tools to get rid of the problem of depending on expensive engineers. It was specifically designed to see if they could get coding to be produced by machines. There is still there has been an adoption of AI in the computer science area. We have seen some large organizations reducing their staff globally. When a company like Meta reduces its staff by 3 or 4% in 1 year, that does have a major impact. Good questions to ask are things like how repetitive and predictable is your job? If you really are just doing everyday routine coding, then that's probably a little bit predictable. How much of it is carried out online? That is a risk factor because then machines can harvest your work and learn how to do the job itself. If a lot of the job involves writing, that's also a problem. Now, then the opposite of this is if it's fixing errors, if it's editing, if you have to go away and have critical thinking conversations, if you have to have discussions with your colleagues about priorities and strategic planning, all of these things can impact all of our jobs, and we can transition into roles that are a little bit heavier on those non-exposed skills. We've seen some industries with higher exposure, certainly finance and insurance are currently undergoing quite high exposure. I think we're coming to the limits of that. And the region that you work in is a really important one, an impactful one. If your job is in London or one of the other major metropolitan areas, the exposure risk is a little bit higher. But all of this means that there are plenty of other sectors like environmental sciences, research support that are growing at the moment in demand. Healthcare in particular has very high demand for data and analytics skills. And then also, of course, our SMEs are struggling. And you can make a really big impact in our small to medium-sized enterprises. It's really the big companies that are pulling back. And I think that's what we've seen with the 8 to 10%. It's large graduate employers that are pulling back, not the slightly smaller companies. So we have seen a 13% decline in software developers, which is quite high, and customer services. And that is very high. My feeling is the software developers in particular were the first adopters of these technologies, and all of the signs suggest the first wave has come, and actually we're into much calmer waters now. There are so many stories online of open source code where it's getting spammed by AI constantly with updates that have to be rejected because they're inadequate quality. And I don't know anybody who's arguing that AI can complete all of the task of a coder. What it can complete is some of the task, and you know that if you're at university, I strongly imagine that you have been using AI to help you with some of your code anyway. So you know how it works and you know the experience of it. It looks like the impact has hit already. It's not coming in the future. Yeah, so and we get this data from looking at OpenAI and Anthropic Claude. They've been tagging and tracking some of the occupational-based activities that they observe in their LLMs. So what kind of queries, what kind of prompts are people asking? How are they using these tools? Are they being used in customer services to deliver chatbot responses? And what they found is actually in some of the most exposed occupations, they've already made that transition. And so we're into a new situation, which we don't yet know what that looks like going forwards. So just because some people have lost their jobs in the past does not necessarily predict where things are going in the future. One of the big challenges we had when we were trying to say, well, is it AI? Genuinely, is it AI? It must be having some impact. There are so many other things that are happening at the moment, quite honestly. We've got so much geographical instability. We've got nations, political leaders constantly threatening war against each other. We have many countries struggling with economic change. There's been a massive transfer of wealth up to the most rich. Most countries have an increased gap between the richest and poorest members of society that has been growing bigger and bigger over the last few years. Especially notably that America's very high inequality levels now, much higher than it ever had before. And so all of these things, and of course the climate is worrying as well and troubling. And so all of these things are having this other secondary impact, and unfortunately they're just all coming together at the same time, which does make for a confusing and troubling and worrying time. I very much hope we will be out of it soon. Is what we're experiencing today unusual? Is it unprecedented? If you read the newspapers, the argument is yes, it's totally unprecedented. Nobody's ever seen anything like this before. We're all going to lose our jobs. What are we all going to do? It's a kind of a panic almost. And I'm sure that's because social media exists, and that is the message that is always going to get picked up by the algorithms. This is an interesting study that came out of the Harvard team, where they just looked at changes in occupations over a very long period of time. You can see we're going back to 1860. And in actual fact, if you look at how disruptive the internet was following the 1990s, that was actually more disruptive and more impactful than AI has been at the moment. So as of today, we are not in an unprecedented situation. In fact, we're actually in one of the calmer periods in terms of occupational stability. Now then, there are some exceptions to this. Anybody who works in the information sector, media, and online information, that is just a sector that is permanently in transition, permanently shifting. It's just the norm there. If we look at periods of high occupational shift, you've got to go back to the 1940s and the 1950s, where it dwarfed the experiences we're having today. So again, is AI causing the problem? It's very difficult to say that AI is taking people's jobs and replacing them. There are so many other things going on at the moment. And of course, you know, the periods of really big transition are these periods that were marked by the global wars. We've got the electronics revolution in the 1960s, and we've got kind of urbanization really starting in the 1900s. So occupational shift is normal. It's just the way that jobs work, and whether today is exceptional and unprecedented, there's nothing to support that yet. I'm not going to commit and say that's never going to happen, but again, a lot of this is media hype. It's the message that sells on social media. So we struggled to find any data that could very directly and specifically link the percentage of change in occupation and the percentage of decrease in occupation specifically to AI. The data's just not out there, it's not available. And to be honest, we don't even have clear definitions of what it means to have a job replaced by AI. But what we did find is a market that is so clearly in transition in many ways, in a time that is unsettling and worrying for many of us, for good reasons. We worry about whether we will have a safe job, whether we will be able to buy a home, all of these things that are under threat in our future. It's time to think about your career progression, not just my first job after graduation, but Where are you going in your career? And we have the data on this because we do have information on our fellows and our most senior members, the ones who are getting paid huge salaries that you want, in the kind of fantastic jobs that you would like to have. And what we have found by looking at their career progression, again, the first job after they graduate is not necessarily the final word on their career. We do have people who have gone into amazing jobs with top companies who've been recruited directly by Meta or Microsoft straight after their work, after their graduation. Very few, to be honest. The vast majority moved to those companies after taking a position, a trainee position in a smaller organization where they test their skills and where they test their limits. And I think that's really worth considering. Your job is just a starting place for your career progression. What we have found is that there is a massive gap between the understanding of the importance of data and the readiness of the population. And this has been consistent again and again and again in study after study after study. This one was a survey of 60,000 graduate recruiters, which is that's a big sample pool, and it was global. It was in Asia, Europe, and the USA, not Africa, I'm afraid. And what they found was a huge gap between the understanding of the value of data analytics and actual skills and ability. That there is a massive gap in talent at the moment. We're doing a project to talk about the gap between the challenges of a tool or a project and how we map the skills talent of the staff to that, because we've got a lot of underqualified people running analytics. And so this is where the opportunities are. We also tracked, well, what is it, if you graduate from your university with a basic set of skills, where will your salary go? And if you stay with that basic set of skills, it's not bad. It increases with time and experience. But, and this is the real big but, if you can get yourself onto a program where you yourself train yourself, you take responsibility for your further education, which I'm afraid in our field of particularly computer science, you are expected to take responsibility for your own skills maintenance. You start off on a better salary, which is great. After 2 years, there's not that much difference. But once you've got those first 2 years in the door, you've got the basics of your job nailed, I guess is the word. You've understood how you communicate responsibly in an office, how you interact in teams. Those first 2 years are an opportunity for you to develop how you manage your time, how you manage complex problems, how you manage competing demands on your time and on your resources, how you negotiate those things. All of these are skills that we have to learn in those first 2 years. What we found after the first 2 years is that then the benefits just start going up, 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 and the gap between you and the people who are not learning just increases. And this is on average. Some of our people who continue to develop their skills, some of our members who continue to develop their skills are on incredibly high salaries. And that's where the high rewards are. So this is one way of taking control. Understand the value of your skills, that legislation has come, that the demand for qualifications and talent will soon follow, because you can't just keep assigning high complexity tasks to someone with no training. That's got to change now that we have legislation, and that the more tools you can get under your belt. I know you're done with learning, but the more tools you can get under your belt, the faster your salary progression, particularly after those first 2 years. And quite honestly, that's when it really matters. That's when you're starting to make decisions like buying a home, investing money in your future, having a family, getting married, paying for a wedding, things that are really important in our lives. And so we're investing today in those benefits in the future. I think I was going to show you the analyst competency framework. I think most of you are familiar with this, but you've got the QR code here if you need to, or you can find it on our website. It's on our public side. And this just lays out the skills that you need to get that promotion. And they're definitely, obviously, the technical skills. Lots of people call themselves an analyst, and perhaps they've never been able to download data from a database using SQL, for example. Is that a valid data analyst? You know, you've looked at a few charts, does not make you a data analyst. So this breaks down all of the stages of how you develop your career as an analyst, things like missing data. How do you handle them? Do you know how to handle it? Do you know how that impacts the results of the work that you're dealing with? All these kinds of questions. So big section on knowledge and analytics. Then we've also got sections on communications. How do we take complex models, complex insights, metrics, weightings, accuracy figures, and how do we translate that into something our colleagues can understand and make a decision on? It's not enough just to present them with these figures and say, oh, our recall was this and our F1 value was that. You know, we actually have to translate that into something that has meaning for our colleagues. We have to advocate for our work as well. It's no good just doing your job silently in the background. You have to be advocating for the work as a leader would, not as someone who's told what to do would. And then, of course, leadership as well comes into it. How do you write a budget for a project, for example? How do you professionally prepare a budget for a project so you can get investment in your work and you can start moving your career forwards, those kinds of things. So if you haven't looked at it yet, go and have a look at our analyst competency framework. Self-assess. Just look at it and say, where do I sit on this? Where am I going? What do I need to do next? What's expected at the next level of my career? Yeah, and you will never get promoted to a senior leading data scientist if you can't write a budget. But I am going to guess none of you have done how to write a budget in your university course. So there's lots of other things that we could be doing that will support you in, particularly after you've graduated, once you're in that job and you're looking at how to optimize those 2 years to get forwards. You know, and lots of you, we've got you into this stage here where you're training and preparing, and it does feel scary. This gap here between training and starting your career is the hardest one for everybody. It is the most challenging. Don't expect an easy time. Expect to have to work at it. But jobs come and go. At one point, jobs in our field, the average lasted 18 months. I think for chief data officers, it's still something like 3 years is the maximum our chief data officers spend in a role, which means 18 months. If you've been in the job for 9 months, you're already halfway through your period of time on that job. And that's quite shocking. And that is very challenging. This is the disappearance of graduate training programs where like your university takes care of your training, you hope your employer will take care of your training. We hope that too, but it's not normal. It's not common. If you can take control of your training, then it doesn't matter if your first job lasts for 18 months. You are progressing in your career towards the next stage. You have a vision of where you're going 2 years from now, 3 years from now, 4 years from now, 5 years from now, and you're taking the actions today that you need to take to get to there in the end. And you know, we hope that after 2 years you'll be at the kind of, wow, you know, you're brilliant at this. You'll use those first 2 years to refine, for example, your descriptive logic, your ability to write logic for algorithms, your actual ability to write code or to write commands in Excel or whichever tool you're using. and do it really well. Most of us have gaps. I have gaps. You have gaps. We all have gaps. The more we can fill in those gaps, the better. Um, then within the first 5 years, you should be managing a project yourself. And again, that's where you have to start thinking about time management, risk management, budgeting, those kinds of things. We hope that you will soon find yourselves on the side of hiring, not applying, but choosing your first hire. And there are so many other things for you to look forward to beyond this first step. So don't get too hung up on this first step. Will these things disappear in a career? It does not look like they will. There are no indications that they will. It is becoming a little bit challenging to get to this stage, the starting your career stage, but once you're there, you should be off. Make sure you record everything, keep a record of it. Again, because of all the AI spamming on job applications, nobody trusts a CV. Nobody trusts an application letter these days. You're going to have to share evidence. We request it, we require it. So make sure you're recording everything. The obvious place is your IOA portfolio, but make sure that anything you do, you have a record of it somewhere that you can at hand keep hold of. The great thing about the IOA portfolio is that it gives you a public profile as well. I remember some YouTube kid who was about 18 years old, very young. I came up on my feed and he was saying how the most important thing in hiring is to have your own website. And and at that point, I didn't actually have my own personal website and I wasn't looking for a job, but I just thought, well, I should do this. I have had so many job offers come through that. Not that I want them, but having your own website really is a game changer. I didn't realize it. And so, I get emails saying, I saw your website, I'm interested in blah, blah, blah. You don't have to pay for a website. You don't have to pay hosting fees. This will give you a profile. If you're an IOA member, this will give you a public profile, which is the equivalent of having your own personal website. Go for it. Use it. Save money. Don't spend £100 on hosting your own website like I do. If you are concerned, if you're a coder and you're concerned, then, just lean into, how much of your coding can be done by an AI. You've been doing it in your studies, I'm sure. You also know how much can't be done by an AI. So make sure that you are mastering AI workflows, that you get the machine to do the 60% boring parts of your work, and you really focus on how to work with those models, understand the limitations. Remember those 1,700 limitations of AI that have been individually named and risks that have been named. Let's start becoming very familiar with those vocabularies of what's wrong with these machines, as well as what's right with them. Learn how to control models. If you've done even a little bit of machine learning, just a little bit of machine learning, we do have large language model training, and we can get you to fine tune a large language model or to create a RAG model with the skills you've already got, quite honestly. And I think the large language model engineering training course, I think it's something like 8 hours. What an amazing thing to put on your CV. So yeah, learn how to control these models and focus on the 40% that adds value that the machine cannot do, and I don't think ever will do. Focus on the last mile of human value. So again, this is accountability. How do you document that you've done the right thing, that you've followed the right processes? Empathy for others, because we're going to have to start working more closely with our colleagues, because we're going to have to negotiate what success looks like, what safety looks like. Everything at the moment is up for negotiation. The days when you could just say, I've built a model, it's successful, trust me, have gone. We now have to negotiate trust and things like that. Focus on accuracy and ethics. And I think that's the main thing. Just assume that anyone who has general skills is competing with a large language model for employment. But if you can get specialist knowledge, if you can be that person who can edit, who can check what a large language model produces, then you have that extra added value that we're looking for. So if you can specialize in a sector, not just in a job, but in a sector. So I specialize in health or aviation or fintech. Then that also gives you a layer of protection if more trouble is coming. And again, as I say, we struggle to find evidence that actually AI is creating chaos out there in the hiring markets. That doesn't mean that it's not. It means that the data we were able to find, the data that was available, does not support that view. But it does not appear that AI is as terrible as social media would make it look like. But if you can get sector-specific knowledge, that is also these are little steps that we can take to be safer in the future.
Thank you for watching. The Institute of Analytics is the global membership body for data professionals. Learn more by following us on LinkedIn, Facebook or Instagram, or visit our website now. The links are in the description.